Under a sky the color of tarnished silver, snow drifted across the lonely clearing where Alara Whitlock's cabin stood like a stubborn memory. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, thin, uncertain, as if even the fire inside doubted its right to keep burning. In the hush of winter, the world seemed to hold its breath, and Alara moved through it like a ghost who had forgotten how to speak. 6 winters had passed since Jonas vanished into a storm much like this one, leaving only his rifle, his coat, and a silence that clung to the walls more fiercely than frost. Folks in Willow Creek stopped saying his name after the 3rd winter, as though grief had an expiration date she had failed to honor. Every morning, before the pale sun touched the horizon, she lit the stove and whispered the same prayer. Not for comfort, but for endurance. The wind rattled the shutters. Snowflakes whispered against the panes like wandering souls. She fed the embers more wood, watched the orange glow pulse against the shadows, then pulled on her worn boots and stepped outside into the frozen dawn. The cold bit at her cheeks, sharp and unforgiving. She welcomed it. Pain, at least, proved she was still alive. The barn creaked as she slid its doors open. Her mare, Juniper, snorted softly, breath clouding the air. Alara stroked the horse's muzzle, murmuring apologies for the cold night. Inside, tools hung neatly on the wall, just as Jonas had left them. She reached for the axe resting against the stump, its handle smooth from years of use, and began splitting wood. The sound of the blade cracking through logs echoed through the forest like a heartbeat. With each swing, memories of laughter by the hearth, of calloused hands lifting her onto a horse, rose and faded like fleeting warmth. By mid-morning, the snow had thickened, cloaking the pines and mountains in white silence. She loaded the wood into a basket, hauled it inside, and set water to boil. The cabin smelled faintly of pine sap, leather, and old books. In a corner, Jonas's fiddle lay untouched, strings gathering dust. She couldn't make herself put it away. Some things needed to remain, even if they hurt to see. Once a week, she rode into town for flour, salt, and lamp oil. The journey felt like crossing invisible borders, from solitude into quiet contempt. That afternoon, muffled bells rang from the church steeple as she entered Willow Creek. Children paused their games to stare. Women tightened their shawls, whispering behind gloved hands. Sheriff Ambrose Clay stood near the mercantile, frost in his mustache, hat pulled low. His eyes softened when he saw her but carried a warning, as though he feared what sorrow might turn her into. "Storm's coming heavy tonight," he said, voice low. "You should stay in town." "I'll be fine," she replied, keeping her tone even, almost polite. There was no room for pity between them. He knew better than to argue. She paid for her supplies at Mrs. Miller's counter, aware of every lingering glance, every muttered word. Some said she was cursed. Others said she'd gone mad from loneliness. She let them talk. Words could not reach where grief had settled. By dusk, she was back at the cabin, cheeks flushed from wind, arms weighted with provisions. Inside, the fire had burned low. She stoked it until flames leapt again, bathing the room in amber light. Outside, the storm began, snow spiraling, wind singing its mournful songs through the trees. Alara sat by the window, mending a tear in her wool cloak, needles clicking softly. For a moment, she imagined another presence in the chair across from her, someone to share the quiet with. She closed her eyes, banished the thought, and focused on the rhythm of thread and cloth. Night deepened. The stove crackled, casting warmth across her shoulders. She lit a single candle on the table, its flame bowing with each draft. Pulling Jonas's coat around her, she read a worn page from his journal. His handwriting was steady, confident. "Winter is cruel, but it teaches us who we are." She traced the words with trembling fingers, then shut the book before tears could stain the ink. Outside, the wind howled like something wounded. In the distance, a sound stirred, faint at first, barely distinguishable from the storm. A low, rhythmic thunder. Hoofbeats. She sat rigid, listening. Again, the thud of hooves against frozen ground, growing closer, deliberate and unhurried. Her heart stumbled. No traveler would be foolish enough to ride in weather like this. She set the journal aside, rose and went to the door, candle in hand. The flame trembled. Through the frost-glazed windowpane, she saw shadows emerge from the white curtain of snow. 3 dark figures on horseback, cloaked in fur and silence. They rode with purpose, not desperation. Snow gathered on their shoulders, their horses breathing clouds into the icy air. Her breath caught. She could make out the curve of a bow slung across one rider's back, the glint of iron at another's waist. Apache. Even at a distance, their bearing spoke of pride and exile. She stepped back, pulse drumming in her ears. The townspeople whispered of raids, vengeance, bloodshed. Yet something in the way they rode, unhurried, solemn, felt more like a prayer than a threat. They halted a few paces from her door. For a heartbeat, nothing moved except the snow cascading from the heavens. Then the tallest dismounted, boots crunching against ice. He did not reach for his weapon. Instead, he lifted a hand to his chest in quiet greeting, breath misting in the lantern light. Alara's fingers tightened around the doorknob. Fear warred with a strange, fragile instinct, hospitality, or perhaps the echo of her husband's teachings. No soul should freeze in the cold while fire still burns inside. Behind the man, the other 2 riders waited, eyes unreadable, bodies bowed slightly from exhaustion. The storm roared around them. Within the cabin, heat flickered and danced. Between those 2 worlds, cold and warmth, solitude and intrusion, Alara stood, heart trembling like a candle in wind. And though every cautious thought urged her to bolt the door, some quieter voice whispered instead. They had come. And the world, once so predictable in its sorrow, would never be the same again. The wind screamed against the cabin walls as Alara's fingers hovered over the latch, heart pounding like a trapped animal. For a breathless moment she hesitated, the silence between her and the riders thick as ice. Then, with a quiet resolve she barely recognized as her own, she pulled the door open. Snow rushed in, swirling around her boots, and the tallest of the 3 men stepped forward, his dark hair braided and frosted white, his eyes the color of distant thunderclouds. He did not bow nor demand, only spoke in a calm, low voice that carried the dignity of someone who no longer feared being refused. We seek shelter from the storm. No apology. No threat. Just truth. Behind him the other 2 riders waited, one sharp-eyed, a faint scar crossing his cheek like a pale river, the other broader, his posture stoic, though his lips were taut with exhaustion. Alara swallowed. The world outside was a furious white blur, and the cold nipped past her shawl like teeth. She could turn them away, and no soul in town would blame her. Yet something inside her, the part that still believed in firelight against darkness, gave in. She stepped back. Come in before the wind eats you alive. They entered single file, stomping snow from their boots, their presence filling the small room with the scent of pine, leather, and long miles traveled. The door thudded shut, muting the storm to a muffled growl. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of logs settling in the stove. Alara moved toward the hearth, feeding the flames, though her hands trembled slightly. The tallest man removed his fur-lined coat, steam rising from the thawing ice on his shoulders. His gaze traveled the room, over the table, the worn rocker, the single bed pushed against the far wall, then returned to her with a quiet, unreadable weight. My name is Talon Blackthorn, he said. He gestured to the others. My brothers, Coda and Coyote. Coda, the one with storm-gray eyes, inclined his head, solemn but not unfriendly. Coyote, the younger, smirked faintly as he brushed snow from his braids. We expected an old trapper or a hunter, he said, voice edged with curiosity. Not. He stopped, either out of respect or caution. She did not ask him to finish. Alara Whitlock, she replied. You can stay until the storm passes. No longer. It was a lie. She wasn't sure if she would have the heart to send them away when the time came. Talon nodded. No gratitude, but a softening around his eyes, as though he understood the weight of her choice. They moved with practiced silence, setting their weapons, a bow, 2 rifles, a hunting knife, near the doorway but within reach. Alara ladled stew into bowls, her every motion watched but never challenged. They ate with quiet restraint, though it was clear hunger gnawed at them. Coyote muttered a thanks before lifting his spoon. Talon remained silent. Coda paused long enough to meet her gaze, gratitude flickering there like the brief flare of a candle in wind. After dinner, they warmed themselves by the fire. Shadows danced across their faces, revealing exhaustion etched into their features. Alara sat opposite them, mending a glove, though her needle paused more often than it moved. "Where were you headed?" she asked. Talon's eyes shifted toward the window, where snow battered the glass. "South. Away from blood feuds and promises broken by both sides." His tone carried no self-pity, only a weary acceptance. Coda spoke next, voice softer, deeper. "We lost people. Homes." His eyes drifted toward the flames. "Winter does not care for grief. It only takes." The words rang through Alara like a bell struck in a cavern. She did not answer. She did not need to. Night settled, thick and dark. She laid blankets on the floor near the hearth. "You'll sleep here," she said, leaving no room for argument. Talon nodded. Coyote muttered something about the floor being heaven compared to frozen earth. Coda offered a quiet, "Good night." She returned it in a whisper, surprising herself. In her bed, she lay awake, listening to the rhythm of unfamiliar breathing. The storm clawed at the walls, but a different tension stirred inside the cabin. Something neither warm nor cold, something like the pause between heartbeats. At dawn, pale light seeped through the frost-laced window. The fire was dying. Alara rose to stoke it and stopped short. A thick wool blanket had been placed near the gap beneath her door, blocking drafts that would have chilled her through the night. Coda stood near the stove, feeding it wood with careful hands. He looked up when he heard her steps but said nothing. Neither did she. Yet something passed between them, and it felt like the first crack in a sheet of ice. The brothers stepped into the morning with purpose. Coyote hauled water from the well, humming under his breath. Talon inspected the broken hinge on the barn door, running a calloused finger over the splintered wood. Coda split logs with Joshua's old axe, movement precise and steady. Alara watched from the porch, breath misting in the air. No man, not even Jonas, had ever moved with such quiet reverence for labor. "Your horse's hoof is cracked," Talon told her shortly after, nodding toward the stable. "If left, she'll go lame." She blinked. "I know." It wasn't true. She hadn't noticed. Shame prickled her skin, but Talon's expression held no judgment. "We'll fix it." By midday, the cabin seemed to breathe differently, less like a tomb and more like a place where life paused, but had not yet given up. Still, unease prowled beneath the surface. They were Apache. She was a white woman living alone. The world was not kind to such crossings. As evening drew close, Coyote leaned back in Jonas's old chair, grinning. "Your stew is better than dried buffalo and frozen regret." Coda shot him a look, half warning, half fondness. Alara almost smiled, then stopped herself. Smiles were dangerous. They made things feel possible. Later, as she stepped outside to fetch more wood, she heard them speaking in their own tongue, soft, rhythmic. A name floated through the air. Hers. She froze in the shadows of the porch. Coda's voice, low and uncertain. Talon's reply, firm, warning. Coyote's laughter, quiet but knowing. She didn't understand the words, but she understood tone. She was not invisible to them. Especially not to Coda. That night the storm eased, leaving the world hushed under a blanket of stars. Alara stood near the window, watching silver light spill over the frozen land. Behind her, Coda approached, steps barely touching the floor. He paused a respectful distance away. "You're home," he said, voice low. "It holds sorrow, but also strength." She turned, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Strength doesn't keep you warm," she murmured. "No," he replied. "But it keeps you from freezing on the inside." She said nothing. Yet something shifted, like snow sliding from a rooftop, quiet but inevitable. Then, from beyond the trees, a distant sound cut the silence, faint, metallic, unmistakable. The clink of bridles. The murmur of men's voices. Torches flickering between the pines. Someone was coming. And they were not coming for shelter. The faint voices beyond the trees faded with the night, leaving only the crack of ice shifting on the river, and the whisper of wind across snow. Whoever rode past did not approach, but their presence settled like a warning in Alara's chest. By morning, the sky cleared into a pale blue, sharp as glass, and sunlight glittered on every frost-laced branch. Yet peace did not return. It merely stood very still, listening. The brothers sensed it too. Talon's jaw tightened as he scanned the tree line. Coyote's humor thinned into silence. Coda lingered at the door of the barn, watching Alara saddle her mare with careful hands. "You're going to town," he said, not asking. She nodded, pulling on her gloves. "They'll talk if I don't." He did not try to stop her, but his gaze followed every movement, as though memorizing the shape of her leaving. The ride to Willow Creek felt longer than usual. Snow creaked under hooves, crows watched from bare branches, and the cold stung her eyes until they watered. When she reached town, she could feel the stares before she saw them. Faces pinched with suspicion, whispers curling like smoke. Mrs. Miller handed her flour and salt without a word, but her hands trembled. Sheriff Ambrose stepped from the porch of the mercantile, eyes shadowed beneath his hat. "You've got company up there," he said quietly. "Not accusation, just truth." "For now," she replied. His gaze softened with something like sorrow. "Alara, folks are scared. Men talk when fear gives them purpose." She tightened her grip on the reins. "Let them talk. Words won't reach the cabin." He didn't argue, but his silence said he knew more than words would come. She didn't linger. By the time she reached the woods, clouds had thickened, and the air carried the metallic taste of snow. The cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, horses tied near the fence, and Coda waiting beside the gate, cloak drawn over his shoulders. Relief flickered across his face, subtle as breath on glass. "You're late," he said. "The storm came sooner than I thought," she answered, dismounting. His eyes held hers a moment longer than they should have, then he reached for the mare's reins. "Go inside. Warm your hands." Inside, the fire was blazing, and Coyote stirred a pot of venison stew with exaggerated seriousness. "We thought the ravens dragged you away," he said with a crooked grin. Alara managed a faint smile. Talon sat sharpening a knife, each stroke slow and precise. "Anything from town?" he asked. She hesitated. "They know you're here." His hands stilled. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. "Then time is shorter than we hoped." Days passed, each marked by small, wordless acts. Coda repaired the broken hinge on the barn door, his fingers steady even in the cold. Alara found the latch on her bedroom window fixed, the draft gone. Coyote stacked wood in perfect rows. Talon carved new handles for her tools, sanding the edges smooth. And Alara in turn, stitched a tear in Coda's coat, baked bread from her dwindling flour, and left an extra blanket near where Talon slept by the fire. The silence between them was no longer hollow. It held something fragile, like warmth cupped in cold hands. One evening, Coda returned from the woods carrying a carved wooden bird. He set it gently on the windowsill. "For the quiet," he said. She traced the wings with her thumb. He watched her, unreadable, but softer than she had ever seen him. "Why help me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. "Because you opened the door." Outside, snow began again, fine and relentless. The world shrank to the glow of lamplight and the sound of breathing. Coyote told a story by the fire, half in English, half in Apache, about a girl who sang storms into sleep. Alara listened, fingers curled around a mug of tea, eyes drifting to Coda's silhouette against the fire. He sat still, but his gaze found her through the dancing flames. Later, after the others slept, she stepped outside to clear her thoughts. The night was so silent it rang. The stars looked close enough to touch. Coda followed moments later, his footsteps muffled in snow. "You shouldn't be alone," he said. She didn't turn. "I've been alone a long time." He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "You aren't now." The words were simple, yet they felt like a promise. Or a risk. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Do you miss your home?" Koda looked toward the dark line of mountains. I miss what it was before war. His voice roughened. But some things, once burned, do not return as they were. She understood. Loss had carved them both hollow in different ways, but the emptiness felt less heavy when shared. The following morning, boot tracks appeared on the edge of the property, not theirs. Deep, deliberate, too many to count. Talon knelt beside them, fingers brushing the disturbed snow. Men, he muttered. More than 5. Alara's stomach turned cold. Town? He nodded. Or worse. They exchanged looks that spoke without words. Danger was no longer distant. It had found the road to her door. The day stretched long and tense. Talon prepared the horses. Coyote packed provisions. Koda stood on the porch, watching the tree line as though expecting it to speak. Alara moved through the cabin in a haze, gathering blankets, dried meat, anything they might need if they left by nightfall. Her home, once a grave of memories, now pulsed with the quiet ache of something living. And now, it might be torn from her again. As the sun began its descent, bleeding orange light across the snow, Koda found her in the stable, hands trembling as she tightened a saddle strap. Alara, he said softly. She didn't look up. You should go before they come. He stepped closer. We won't leave you. Her breath caught. If you stay, they'll kill you. If you leave, Tears pricked her eyes. I'll be alone again. His hand hovered near hers, not touching, but close enough to feel its warmth. You opened your home to strangers, he said. Let us fight to keep it safe. She finally lifted her gaze. His eyes, calm, steady, storm-gray, held no fear. Only resolve. Before she could answer, a sound shattered the fragile stillness, the distant crack of a rifle echoing across the frozen valley. Not a warning. A beginning. The rifle's echo rolled across the valley like thunder tearing open the sky. Alara's breath froze in her throat. Koda was already moving, hand on his rifle, eyes sharp as flint. Talon stepped outside, scanning the tree line. Coyote muttered a curse and kicked snow over the fire to dull its glow. The sun had barely slipped behind the mountains, yet the world felt darker, as if twilight itself were holding its breath. From the ridge beyond the pines, torchlight flickered. Shadows moved. 6, maybe 7 men, mounted, rifles slung, faces shadowed beneath hats. Alara knew that shape, that posture, that righteous anger. Men from Willow Creek. Men who believed fear gave them permission. Sheriff Ambrose's horse trailed behind them, his shoulders heavy, his lantern dim. They came faster than we thought, Talon murmured. His voice held no fear, only the low steadiness of a man long acquainted with the edge of death. Koda glanced at Alara. Go inside. She didn't move. This is my home. His expression flickered. Pride, worry, something unspoken. Talon said softly. Then stand behind us. The riders reached the fence line. Their leader, Gerald Pike, spat into the snow. Alara Whitlock. Step aside. Those savages are coming with us, alive or cold, your choice. His voice was laced with triumph, as if he believed this was justice. She stepped forward before fear could stop her. They've done nothing to you. Pike sneered. Your pity is turning to treason. Behind him, rifles cocked like snapping bones. Sheriff Ambrose didn't reach for his gun. He only whispered, Alara, please. Snow swirled in the fading light as Talon spoke, calm and grave. We want no blood. Let us leave at dawn. Pike laughed. No one leaves. Not with what you are. Koda shifted, one step closer to her, as if his body alone could stand between her and the world. Coyote's hand rested on his knife, his dark eyes bright with fire. Alara's pulse roared in her ears. The cold bit her skin, yet sweat gathered at the nape of her neck. She could taste iron on her tongue, though no blood had yet been spilled. She raised her chin. If you want them, she said, voice clear, you'll have to come through me. Silence followed, so complete even the wind paused. Pike's eyes hardened. Move. No, her voice didn't shake. He lifted his rifle. What happened next was not loud at first. It was a breath, a glance, a shift in the snow. Then, the crack of a shot split the air. Pain burst across Koda's shoulder as the bullet grazed him, spinning him slightly, blood blooming scarlet against snow. Elara gasped, reaching for him, but he stood firm, teeth clenched, refusing to fall. The world erupted. Talon stepped forward, shouting in Apache, voice like thunder. Coyote drew his knife, swift, glittering. Another rifle fired. Snow exploded at their feet. Sheriff Ambrose hauled Pike's arm down, knocking his aim off course. "Are you mad? You'll kill her," he barked. Pike shoved him aside. She chose her side. Elara pressed her hand to Koda's shoulder, blood warm beneath her palm. His breath hissed through his teeth, but his eyes stayed on the men. Talon spoke, voice louder now. "Enough. This land isn't yours to claim or stain with more death." Pike pointed his rifle at Talon. "You're done speaking." Before he could fire, a voice rang through the frozen air. Not loud, but weighted with something that stopped them all. "Elara! Stop!" She stepped forward, away from Koda's reach, standing between the two sides. Lantern light glinted on her hair. The wind tugged at her coat, but her eyes held steady. "No one dies on this land. Not for me. Not anymore." Her voice carried across the silence like a prayer, or a warning. Ambrose dismounted slowly, hands visible. "Gerald, that's enough. This isn't justice. It's murder wearing a coat of pride." Pike's jaw shifted, fury battling doubt. The other men shifted in their saddles, uncertain now. Snow drifted between them like falling ash. Talon lowered his rifle. Koda stood beside Elara, blood soaking his sleeve, gaze fixed on her, as though she were the only steady thing in a world tilting toward darkness. Coyote, silent for once, watched Pike with a predator's patience. Pike's breath steamed in the cold. "If we walk away, everyone will know we let them live." Ambrose's voice was tired. "Better to live with whispers than buried with honor." Pike looked at Elara again. Something in her eyes, unyielding, wounded, brave, made his hands tremble. He spat into the snow once more, but his voice cracked. "This isn't over." He yanked his horse's reins, turned, and the men followed, torches bobbing like dying stars. Ambrose lingered. "They won't forget this. Nor will the town. Be ready." Elara only nodded. He touched his hat and rode away. Silence returned, thicker than before. Elara turned to Koda. Blood glistened between her fingers. "Sit," she whispered. He obeyed only because her voice left no room for refusal. Inside the cabin, firelight spilled across the floor. She cleaned the wound, hands steady despite the storm still raging inside her. Koda watched her, silent. When she wrapped the bandage around his arm, their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away. Talon stood by the window, watching the darkness. "They'll return with more," he said. "Then we'll go before they do," Coyote replied. His voice was light, but his eyes were not. Elara's chest tightened. The thought of the cabin empty again felt like winter swallowing spring. Koda spoke softly. "We don't want to bring more danger to you." She looked up sharply. "You didn't bring it. It was already here. I was just too quiet to hear it." The fire crackled, casting shadows along the walls. Snow tapped against the windows like fingers. Talon nodded slowly. "We leave at dawn." Those words felt like a door closing. Elara tied the final knot on Koda's bandage. "Then I'll make bread for the road." It was the only answer she could give. Night deepened. The brothers slept near the fire. Koda remained awake, watching the flames. Elara sat across from him, unable to sleep. The room glowed in soft amber light, the storm outside a distant whisper. "You could come with us," Koda murmured, almost to himself. She looked up, eyes wide. "Leave this place?" He nodded. "A home is not wood and stone. It's where someone waits for you." Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "And if you never return?" His gaze held hers, unwavering. "Then at least you won't be waiting alone." The room went still. Outside, the wind quieted, as if the earth itself was listening. Before she could speak, Hoofbeats thundered again. Closer, faster, urgent. A lantern's glow flashed through the trees, and a desperate voice called her name. Not Pike. Not hatred. Sheriff Ambrose. And the fear in his voice meant only one thing. They had run out of time.